تتوقع إنه في ناس صحفيين ممكن
45 دقيقة.
طب يلا ابدأ يا أخي.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for coming. In the last 10 years, Jordanian activists were asking for real reform in their country, asking for equality and justice for all Jordanians. But yet, they were faced by oppression and often detention. Today, Jordan's King Abdullah II met with President Biden at the White House, marking the first official Washington visit during the Biden administration. Abdullah's visit comes at a moment of particular political uncertainty, economic decline, and escalating repression in the kingdom, with minimal efforts by the king to attempt to begin tangible reform. Jordan has been largely left out of global trends toward democratization. Authoritarianism is how the monarch controlled Jordan, through many unpopular changes to the constitution in 2014, 2016, the monarch reigns through absolutism, disabling and stripping all democratic institutions from their constitutional powers, such as the parliament. With authoritarianism and absolute powers comes corruption. But in Jordan, we don't only have corruption, but also kleptocracy, which affects every citizen in Jordan in their daily lives, their freedom, which has resulted in dramatic and unprecedented high level of unemployment and poverty. Jordanians strive for freedom and true democracy, and to achieve this goal, the king must step back and return all powers to the people. He must accept parliamentary monarchy, separation of powers, independent judiciary system, and principles of accountability. And allow the citizens of Jordan to be part of the governing body, working to achieve their national interest rather than the monarch and his cronies' interests. Political reform is a general term that includes two separate but related processes. Democratization involves the expansion of formal structures of citizen participation. Elections are the most important component of democratization because they allow citizens to exercise control over public policy and to hold leaders accountable for their decisions. Democratization also includes issues related to citizenship, since it determines who may participate in elections. Jordan margining large portion of its population, especially Jordanians from Palestinian origins, resulting in an unequal representation to their population density. According to current definition of democracy, democratic states must not only hold free and fair election, but must also guarantee such civil liberties, such as freedom of speech, assembly, and association. Liberalization is therefore a second aspect of political reform, focusing on the expansion of the civil and political rights. Ordinary citizens may not know the precise extent to which the royal family divert the country revenues for its own use, but they can easily observe conspicuous consumption habits at a time when Jordanian citizens are experiencing reduced personal income, unemployment, and declining services. Royal spending often serves as a focal point for complaints about the lack of regime accountability, enhancing frustration with these economic trends. Jordan's King Abdullah II announced on June 10, 2021 that he had created a high-level committee tasked with advancing political reform. The initiative comes after the palace detained the king's half-brother, Prince Hamza, in April, along with several other high-profile figures for an alleged coup plot. But many viewed that allegation as an attempt to distract from growing discontent over Abdullah rule from the rising popularity of Prince Hamza. Yet, rather than securing international support, the state's story prompted a barrage of negative coverage from global media. From global media outlets identifying Jordan's actual problem as lack of political reform against this backdrop of regime challenges. The United States, Jordan's leading foreign backer, has continued to pursue business as usual, expressing public support for the king without pressing for meaningful reforms, as one put it. While this latest reform initiative seems encouraging, many such efforts have occurred over the last few decades without resulting in any significant or sustained increase in political reforms. For one, episodic pressure for political reform tends to be general enough that Jordan needs only to address it rhetorically until attention is diverted for another. Jordan's traditional ways of maintaining control still work well enough to prevent major trouble. However, the method of the country's leaders have become less effective each year, as measured by the increased frequency of protests, the growing number of politically motivated detentions, and the severity of the opposition reactions. The efficiency of the state's traditional tools of control is eroding too gradually to prompt the serious consideration of new tools, but steadily enough that Jordan will eventually find itself unable to manage the crisis. The king must consider implementing these specific reforms soon to address citizens' frustration. In Article 26 in the Jordanian Constitution, all executive powers shall be vested in the king, who shall exercise his powers through his ministers in accordance with the provisions of the present Constitution. But yet, in Article 30, states that the king is immune from any liability and responsibility, in contradiction to the basic principles of accountability. So the king gave all the powers as in the executive branch, but yet he's not accountable for any. The second point, while the parliament members are elected by the people, but yet the king has the power to dissolve the parliament, overriding the people will whenever he wishes. But the powers vested in him in using the powers vested in him in Article 34 in the Constitution. So the king can override the people will just by issuing a royal decree to dissolve the parliament. The third thing is the king appoints the prime minister and the ministers and has the power to dismiss the government for a reason or no reason at all, by the powers vested in him in Article 35 in the Constitution. Jordan had 19 governments in the last 20 years, with 1 month and 1 year and 2 months average government life. The king appoints members of the Senate and has the power to dismiss all of them at once for a reason or no reason at all, using the powers vested in him in Article 36 in the Constitution. Our parliament formed by 2 chambers, the parliament members and the Senate members. And the king has all the power to dissolve both for reason or no reason at all, using the power he gained in the constitutional changes made in 2014 and 2016. The King, at his own discretion, can adjourn the session of the National Assembly, both chambers, at any time. And he has up to 3 times to adjourn the Assembly. And again, for reason or no reason at all, by the powers vested in him in Article 81 in the Constitution. In Jordan, almost all draft laws originated in the executive branch of the government, as set in the Article 95 in the Constitution, before they are sent to the country's parliament for approval. On the rare occasions when members of the parliament do propose legislation, the Constitution stipulates that the executive branch must review, edit, and approve the bill before the full parliament can consider it for a vote. In Article 98, judges are appointed and dismissed by royal decree and serve at the King's disposal. The King, by a royal decree, can suspend the operations of the state laws using the powers vested in him in Article 124 in the Constitution.
And?
One of the tools the state has used to maintain control is extrajudicial detention, known as in Jordan as administrative detention. And my colleague will address the freedom and liberties issues in Jordan, but I will summarize some here also. The procedures enables authorities in the name of the district governors to detain anyone they deem potential threat to public order, whether or not they have yet committed any crime. Administrative detention also bypasses judicial oversight, providing an attractive option for authorities to lock up and intimidate anyone deemed a troublemaker, including political activists. Without having to justify the detention in court, some activists get out within few days after authorities deem the message has been successfully delivered. Some remain in detention for months. In one case, the political activist spent 9 months in solitary confinement and was released 10 months later. Jordan is transitioning from society where key division and balances that have long been based on authoritarian nationalism are increasingly based on social class. This presents the state with a type of opposition to which it is less accustomed, rather than coping with this new opposition with sustained political reform program. Jordan has instead reacted by increasing its reliance on detention, again, as one said. According to the quasi-governmental National Center for Human Rights, from 2008 to 2013, such detentions hovered at or below 15,000 cases a year. After the Arab Spring, detention jumped to around 20,000 a year in 2014 and 15, then to approximately 30,000 in 2016 and around 35,000 in 2017. In 2018 and 19, the last 2 years for which data is available, such detentions numbered about 38,000 each year at a time. Administrative detainees have made up more than 20% of Jordan's present population. So 1 in 5 prisoners in Jordan being detained by this law. Criticizing far wider range of subjects, including austerity measures, education policy, and the government pandemic response, the restrictions of online speech has contributed to the overall decline in citizen-state relations in Jordan, hampered the government's ability to track public opinion, and left citizens with even fewer outlets for their frustration. One of the most effective steps the Jordanian government could take to loosen restrictions on expression and rebuild trust with the public would be to revoke Article 11 of the cybercrime law. The article stipulates a minimum of 3 months of jail time for anyone who deliberately sends, resends, or publishes data or information online that involves defaming, vilifying, or insulting any person. This provision is often used to prosecute people, including journalists, who criticize government policies or raise concerns about possible corruption and other misconduct of public officials. Although this is not the only provision of Jordanian law used to control political speech, it is one of the most frequently employed. Article 11 is also particularly powerful as Jordan's law interpretation bureau ruled in 2015 that the provision supersedes a prohibition in the country's press and publication law in jailing journalists. While efforts by local society organizations like an investigative journalism collective known as Zipper have so far helped prevent the state from making the law even more restrictive, Article 11 remains in force. In Jordan, at the moment, Jordanians know that all powers rest with the king, and therefore blame him for policy failures. Protests in recent years have coincided with increasingly harsh criticism of the king. A strong national legislator could credibly share responsibility for the state's success and failure. The more that citizens feel they can bring their grievances and feedback to parliament rather than straight to the palace, the more the king, and by extension the kingdom, will be insulated from extensional challenges.
Do you know that there's purpose in your plasma?
Such a constitutional change would not address the elephant in the room, namely that Jordan intelligence services can continue to pressure parliament members or members of the parliament to adhere to the state preference no matter what the member of parliament's official power may be. Nevertheless, the more official authority parliament wields, the harder it will be for the state to hide such interference. King Abdullah has stated several times that he would like a strong political party system with 2 or 3 main parties to emerge in Jordan. But today the country has 50-something political parties, most of which exist primarily on paper, with the notable exception of the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood Islamic Action Front. The absence of the strong parties has contributed to the sense among Jordanian citizens that the official political structure are not the most effective avenue for expressing grievances. A survey by the International Republican Institute in late 2019 found that more than twice as many people, which is 52%, believe that protest was the most effective way to influence government decisions compared with casting a vote, which is 23%. Jordanian and foreign analysts of the kingdom election system explained in interviews with a news outlet that one of the primary reasons that the strong parties have failed to emerge in the preponderances of electoral districts whose populations are small and homogeneous, enough that they reinforce tribal patronage politics. Jordan took modest step toward addressing this issue in 2013 when it made subset of national legislature seats nationally elected, meaning any Jordanian voter could vote to determine the winner of these seats, no matter where they live. The experiment produced some modest results, a few relatively reform-oriented candidates with detailed policy platforms won national seats. But unfortunately, the government eliminated the nationally elected seat after only election cycle, one election cycle, before candidates or voters could get used to the system. Government officials and others who oppose bringing back the nationally elected seats tend to justify their position by arguing that the only party ready to campaign effectively for those seats is the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood. While their prediction is logical, it has not been tested as the Brotherhood boycotted for unrelated reasons, the only election cycle to use the national lists. I'm going to try to make it a little bit shorter and go to suggested constitutional changes to enforce reform in Jordan and bring the country to the democratic level that we all hope for. Most of the political activists in Jordan support parliamentary monarchy, where the king will be the symbol of the kingdom, but not the ruler, where all institutions to be elected directly by the people and be responsible and accountable for the people. We ask for equality, for justice, separation of power, and accountability. That's the least the political activists in Jordan expect for their country and hope for their country. And thank you for giving me the chance to speak to you today.
Thank you. I'm going to address Jordan's major economic challenges. Jordan is relatively a new country which has emerged per the arrangements of Sykes-Picot Treaty in 1921, independent from the United Kingdom since 1946. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan became a constitutional monarchy and has 4 kings governed till the present time. Nevertheless, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan never been a free country, never been governed by neither its own people nor for their welfare, but for the interests of ghosts who we can feel their presence but unable to see them. Considering government monopoly to the data and manipulation and fabrications of numbers and facts, Jordan's main economic problem revolves around the following facts. Number 1, before King Abdullah assumed his power in 1999, Jordan was owning many public organizations which were able to sustain the national GDP and maintain the economy for 54 years. With the ambitious reforms agenda of King Abdullah, which introduced a series of liberal economic policies, including and not limited to signing the free trade treaties with a number of countries, followed by privatizations of the economy despite the general rejection of the people of Jordan. Yet, nobody knows where and how the privatization money spent or gone. Number 2, Jordan's public debt has increased sharply between the years of 1999 and the years 2021 from 9.1 billion to 47 billion. The national debt to GDP ratio between 2015 and 2019 was 108%. Somehow the government was able to borrow 7 billion from the Social Security Investments Fund (SSIF). It's roughly about 50% of SSIF assets, ignoring the fact that the SSIF is an independent institution and shouldn't borrow from it, especially with the lack of payback guarantees, which were risking retirement pensions for millions of people in the country. Its economy is not stable and about to collapse. Additionally, in order to borrow more money in the near future, the government had deceived the international lender by excluding the 7 billion from the national debt in order to reduce the debt to GDP ratio into 88%. Besides that, no one knows the team regulated the loan and how and where the 7 billion were spent. And as a result, and according to the International Bank Report issued on June 2021, it stated that the SSIF may not be able to pay the monthly pensions for retirees as early as the next few years. 3. During the same period of time, unemployment rate has surged. The World Bank has reported on May 2021 the youth unemployment rate in Jordan has reached 51%, with 14% increase from 37% in 2019. Fourthly, the high unemployment rate is the immediate consequences of the systemic corruption, mischief, and unaffordable living expenses and high taxes, which reached about 65% of the individual income per capita, according to the America's Cost of Living Survey in 2020. Amman, the capital of Jordan, was ranked 71 worldwide. Amman was ahead of some major cities in some countries where they have high GDP per capita. For example, Amman is ahead of Munich in Germany, Helsinki in Finland, Oslo in Norway, Brazil in Belgium, and Detroit in the United States, and it is the most expensive Arab capital. 5. During the same period of time, more than 60 independent public institutions were established, either to hire as a reward from certain close friends to the king, or to fulfill a requirement of qualifications for international aid from international organizations like the United Nations, or from donor countries like the United States and European countries. The bitter fact about those institutions that most of them are not in service, and other government institutions could perform its duties or ministries. Number 6, the high cost of energy has been impacting the daily life of people and making Jordan less attractive for foreign investors. Furthermore, the existing local industries started relocating their facilities to Turkey and Egypt, especially when the government buy oils and natural gases with discounted prices from neighboring countries and sell it back to the consumers 3 times of the average world prices, making Jordan sits at the top rank in energy, the price in Middle East. 7. Jordan is a poor country with limited resources and sacred water supplies, and most shares of water goes to irrigated private farms and backyards owned by a few dominating state figures. Besides that, bad state agriculture policies and planning, in addition to other factors like the continuous and rapid increase of unemployment rates, which exceeds 51%, according to the recent World Bank report, and to the decrease growth of GDP and shrinking economy, has caused a sharp decline in agriculture sector, threatening to shut down related agricultural manufacturing, risking thousands of workers to lose their jobs, and leaving over 25% of farmers unable to pay their bank loans and other expenses, and encouraging others to abandon farming. 8. Jordan used to be the major health provider of surgical and medical care in the Middle East, but now our health network is deteriorating and about to collapse, and having citizens died because of lack of oxygen and negligence. The above-mentioned problems are just a few from among other ongoing problems, which threatening both the food and collective securities, and continues to push Jordanians to protest and got radicalized and to adopt coercive means, God forbidden, and this might drag not only Jordan but the whole region into violence and war, considering Jordan has the longest borders with unstable and unsecure state of Israel. Jordanian people are fuming on social media, according to many observers, because of economic hardships, corruption, lack of equal employment opportunities, and freedom. The question arose here, will the United States or European allies, who cares about peace and security, let the lives of innocents to be wasted like the example of Iraqis, Syrians, Yemenis, and Libyans? All Jordanians at home and abroad are hoping Biden's administration's legislators to consider, evaluate, and assist Jordanian to overcome their critical problems and help push for economy, political, and constitutional reforms, and recognize the rights of Jordanians to share power and govern, and retain the people authority and exercise their freedoms and rights, just like our fellow American citizens and as stated by our father founders in U.S. constitutions. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you.
How are you? I'm talking about today about human rights in Jordan. This report aims to analyze the violation of human rights in Jordan by providing various instances that support the arguments. Laws such as the crime prevention laws and the defense law provide sweeping powers to the authorities to arrest and charge people. The laws curtail the freedom of expression and make it a crime to criticize the king and his government. The authorities can arrest and charge persons whose posts in social media platforms appear to be insulting the king or undermining the regime. For example, Sabri al-Mashaba, one of the activists detained, was a 31-year-old teacher resident in Liban. He was arrested because of 4 Facebook posts he had written, in which only one post references to the king of his name by his name. Al-Mashaba was charged with insulting the king and was handed a 2 years prison sentence. Another example, in 2019, the government detained political activists belongs to the Iraq movement. The charges leveled against them include insulting the king and undermining the regime. The king detained his brother, Prince Hamza bin al-Hussein, after he spoke against intolerance of political dissent and government corruption. Therefore, justice reforms are needed in Jordan as the current valid human rights. Also, there's another example. Ahmed Tabanja, a human rights advocate, was detained by authorities for broadcasting a protest held by the Jordanians over Facebook Live. In the final, every government in the world must respect the rights of its people, and Jordan is no exception. King Abdullah II and his government officials appears to be having a field day in terms of imposing consults in the citizens. The Jordanian laws prohibit any form criticizing the king, Islam, Christianity, government institutions and officials, and foreign countries. Such laws encourage the authorities to operate with impunity because they are sure they will not be held accountable for their actions. The freedom of expression is another human right that's emerged amongst Jordanians thanks to the laws of the land. The citizens risk being detained for using social media platforms to critique the regime. Therefore, the violation of human rights by the Jordanian government is a serious concern that must be addressed to safeguard the lives of the citizens. Thank you so much. Very short answer.
Is there any questions?
Can you identify yourself and what roles you play? You know.
Absolutely. Stop.
Yeah, this is Hazim Almomani. I am assistant professor in organizational leadership. I'm teaching mostly in management, and I'm working also with for a company as counseling for international students mostly.
I'm Adnan, that's A-D-N-A-N, and last name Alattiyat, that's A-L-A-T-T-I-Y-A-T. I'm an attorney, an academic also. I teach conflict of laws in Washington University in St. Louis. I'm a political activist, as you can tell. And I guess I'll stop there. Adel.
Yeah, and Adel, A-D-E-L, A-D-E-L,
Yeah.
A-L-K-U-R-D-I, PhD, International Relations. I am a researcher, officer, and writer, political activist in the political position. taking care of the political, or any of the economic paper here presented here. And all we seek just what you listened from us just a few minutes ago. And I'll hand you a hard copy too to make it easy for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I guess we were a committee here. We were in charge of running a protest there. The protest, the visit of King Abdullah II to the White House. Trying to outline and focus on the flaws we're suffering back home. From corruption, mischief, and in all areas, administrative, political, and economical, and the country is around to be economically collapse, and it's close, to have more, pushing towards, extremism, and that's exactly, why we came here, to express our concern. Yeah.
Yeah, so I heard people in protest talking about King Abdullah's corruption, his own corruption, calling him Ali Baba. Can you highlight some of the issues, all of you, about the king, the Jordanian king, has a reputation here, he's well liked in Washington, but you don't hear a lot about his corruption and his involvement in this corruption. So can you just highlight that one part of his corruption and the money that you were talking about? What is his personal involvement in his assets abroad?
The problem that we are dealing with is a total cover-up and fabrications from the side of the Jordanian government. And the data here is showing us that country before King Abdullah assumed his power back in 1999, we were doing not bad at all, and even our national debt was like 9.1 billion. Today, after 21 years of rule by King Abdullah, we reached like 47 billion so far, and we own nothing. Our economy is totally collapsed. We own no industry at all. They sold all our assets, to foreign investments, and he gripped on all three branches of the government, the judicial, the executive, and the legislations, and he stripped, the people of their official powers, and basically, they are, they are, running a style of a dictatorship, system, and they are disabling, all parliamentary, powers, it's overlighted, I mentioned in the Constitution. So, business-wise, King Abdullah, when he comes in, his main concern about his personal reputation, he comes and saw himself in the West as a decent guy, as a humanic guy who cares, about democracy, but in country, everything the opposite way. And if you look at his personal investments, it's so high. We not, it's hard to bring numbers about his personal investments, but you can see it everywhere, especially in the United States. He and his wife, Queen Rania. So, but it's a clear cut. We are dealing with a corrupted, regime, and using the assets of the country to serve his personal interests at the cost of his own people. That would be fair.
Yep. اوكي بدي اسال سؤال بالعربي راح اعيده بالانجليزي كمان. كيف بتبرر الافراج عن 389 معتقل اردني قبل يومين تقريبا في باب الحريات؟ How do you see releasing 389 political prisoners like 2 days ago in terms of human rights? How do you see that? How do you justify that? Thank you.
الإجابة في العربي هذولا كانوا موجودين تحت قانون منع الجرائم which is the law of the crime prevention law. So where the official, they can put anyone in any case, depends on their mood that day, in a jail for for sometimes a year, or maybe more than that. So we think the guys, they are, it's something against the human rights to put 300, 400 people in the jail for no reason. And they never have been in a court. So that's against the law even in Jordan. الإفراج عنهم نراه بأنه تغول على السلطة القضائية. There's no justice, court of justice. It's away from that. But recently they held by just the wishes of some officials. They got the approval from the king, the absolute power for them.
I have a story. I can tell a story. Excuse me, sir. My name is Ghazi.
Yeah.
I am brother. Can you stop? Okay. Okay. Okay.
وضح لنا أكثر في موضوع الاعتقالات الأخيرة، مدى ارتباطها بانتقاد الفساد في الأردن.
Repeat every question.
He talked about the last detent and all the guys who get arrested recently about corruption. When you always even write or even about intentions in Jordan, sometimes it's a crime. It's about intentions. It's not about your actions. This is happened many times. And I believe this is something against human rights, and it's against the freedom of any people, any century. This is the 21st century, and I believe our people in Jordan, they need, they deserve to be a human, to treat it by human.
If I may add, corruption is a serious problem in Jordan. It's not something you can undermine or overlook. It started affecting the economy in a very dramatic way. People can notice things. They can see it. People who look for transparency in Jordan can find it. They cannot reach information. They cannot collect information. Even if they attempt to do so, more often they faced with detention. They are faced with threats by the intelligence agency in Jordan. With lack of accountability is a perfectly ground for rumors as well. Not everything we hear is true. However, lack of transparency in the government resulted in such situations. When Jordan received about $3 billion, between $2 and $3 billion a year in foreign assistance, and the numbers are published locally separately from different departments. If you add them up and you look at the budget, they don't match. They never matched. In one instant, we get a piece of information from the executive director of the Custom and Borders Protection and Custom. And he said that he collected that year, that's 2020, 1.32 billion JB. Then when you go to the budget for the 2021 and the final accounting for 2020, and you see the number is 375 million, with almost $1 billion difference. That's a big indication of corruption. But when the government faced with those numbers, they refused even to justify them. They denied the number that published by the executive director of the Border Protection and Custom. A week later, he was fired. This is the core of corruption. Also, people can see the cronies of the king and his family with the massive spending habits. They can see that also. When they see the in-laws of the king, almost they came with nothing from Kuwait just before the king married his wife. Then a few years later, they are multi-billionaires. People can notice that also. So this is the effect. I mean, we have, right now I think it's the number 28% in unemployment, almost 50% unemployment rate in the youth, and first college degree, it's also about 50%, and overall, I think it's the number is about 28% now. It's a very high number.
My question to you is, what do you like the Biden administration to do? I mean, there is a meeting today.
I really appreciate this question.
You hope that Biden administration will do, correct?
Yes.
To address this.
Well, first, I want to mention that the United States has multiple and often conflicting interests at stake in Jordan political reform. The contradiction in these interests often result from differing time horizon. Political reform would serve U.S. interests well over the long term. However, in short term, it has two potentially negative effects. It could make the regimes much more sensitive about cooperation with the United States, particularly in the security realm. Although the United States has a strong long-term interest in seeing political reform progress in Jordan, from normative perspective, democracy and free expressions are fundamental American values that should be encouraged throughout the world. And if you remember, the 2000 National Security Strategy defines U.S. core values as political and economic freedom. However, that conflict created pushback against the political reform in Jordan and caused many delays. If we combine the short and the long-term interests, which is true today, as both short and long-term interests in Jordan encourage and should push forward with the political reform. And the vast majority of the last 10 years or 12 years, the United States never connected and conditioned its assistance with the political reform. And if we hope for something, we hope first for accountability for the public aid, for the United States aid to Jordan. And second, we hope that the United States will condition its aid on political reform. That not happened yet. Many political activists, even within the United States, criticizing the administration for not doing so. So today, we cooperate and we join those voices to ask the administration to condition any aid to Jordan with its political progress and its political reform. Thank you.